And good morning and welcome to Regent International School. And this week's Mindful Monday is all about transitions. My name is Matt Flynn. I'm the Deputy Head of EYFS and Key Stage 1. And today I'm joined by some lovely people here as an audience physically, and some of you are joining in from home also. I'm going to begin by telling you a little about myself, my experience, some things that I've found useful to help with transitions so far. And then we're going to cover some of the questions that you've submitted in advance. There's over 30 questions. I've tried to group them together to make sure that we're getting a good coverage of the age ranges that we have here at Regent, and some specific questions as well. So let's begin. Okay. So transition typically refers to any kind of change, but in education, we look at key year groups for children. Normally, joining big school, as some people call it, is probably the first one. But some children, particularly in Dubai, that first transition might even be into nursery. And depending which country you originate from, your culture, your beliefs, some children may have already experienced several physical transitions before they get to big school. And typically in the UK sector, we would not have too many transitions throughout the year, whereas in the international setting, it's a flow of people in and out all the time. And in fact, this morning, just before I came here, there is a new child starting in year 2 with just 4.5 weeks to go before the end of the year. Now, people do this for different reasons. In this particular case, they wanted the child to have a few weeks before the summer to familiarize themselves with the school, and then really look to make the progress from September onwards. But as we go through the slides, we'll talk about a few different examples that we've experienced and hopefully pull out some tips that are useful to you. Okay. So to begin with, a little bit about myself, and this is important, I think, for several reasons as we go forward. The more you know about yourself, the more you know you can help those people around you, and your community, and of course your children. So this is a picture of me and my brother, my twin brother, and some of you may know that already. It's a 50-50 shot. Any guesses which one I am? Hands up for left, maybe. Hands up for right. I am on the right. That's me, the handsome one. Yeah, I'm a twin brother, and people ask me that about us quite a lot. You know, what's it like? I don't know anything different. There's just 2 of us. My mum is also a twin, and she is one of 3 sets of twins. And so this idea of transition is really interesting to me, because we were in the same class until we were year 2, so 7 years old. And then I always joke that I never saw him again after. Okay, and we've lived pretty much completely different lives, yet we had exactly the same teacher until we were 7 years old. And I assume our parents treated us in roughly the same way. And I'm sure siblings will always think differently, but kind of consistently. So the background here about my upbringing, I think, is quite important. And it's formed my opinions and values as a parent and as a teacher. And the word I've put down here is bias. Now, I think we sometimes use this word negatively, but for me and how my parents brought myself and my brother up, these are the things that were really, really important. And this sense of community is particularly, I felt, the strongest one. As I took my daughter back to the UK for the first time in December, some of the people that I grew up with are still there, and they wanted to be introduced to her and so on. And I think that's probably something to do with my upbringing and the values that we were expected to have as a family, but also the fact that everybody knew us, so you couldn't get away with anything. So you had to have these strong values, and that helped in transition because you felt confident, you felt comfortable, you knew the people around you, you knew there were people to go to if you needed help, but also if you made a poor choice, you weren't going to get away with it as well. So the older we got, it kept us on a straighter road, definitely. And that's something the questions about secondary have been particularly concerned about, is the different cultures and backgrounds, different expectations, peer pressure, how those things can affect children at different ages. So we're going to move on and just ask a few questions. I'm not going to read them to you, but I want you to just scan through those questions and start to generate some ideas about yourself and kind of the biases and expectations that you might have as a parent, as a member of a family, as a member of a bigger community. And for me, it's quite difficult to replicate the proverb at the top, "and taking a village to raise a child," when we live internationally. Because often you're choosing to be separated from your community, from the comfort that you grew up in, and it takes time. It takes time to replicate that. Now, one of the things that I've very deliberately done here is misspell the word village, which I'm sure some of you have noticed already. And I'm guilty of doing this sort of thing myself. I focus on what goes wrong sometimes, and I let it sit with me, and it frustrates me. And one of the things that I'm going to keep coming back to, especially with transition, things are going to go wrong. Children make mistakes, adults make mistakes. It should not define who we are. We have to move forward. We use it to avoid repeating the same errors, of course, but it shouldn't make us afraid of failure. And transition is just change. And we know as adults change is difficult. As you sit before me, the back seat's filled first. The front seat's largely empty. These are things that we do all our lives. We like to sit on the periphery sometimes until we find our level of comfort, and then we decide to join in. Children are no different. They need time to absorb the environment that they are in. They need to find where they are in that community, in that group, and then they will make their way. Okay? So I do, come back to this. I think we always share the slides anyway, but when you're asking about how you can support your child, start with yourself. It's so important. And we'll keep coming back to that idea as well, in that know who you are, know what support you need, know what triggers you, and how to avoid that. Because there are going to be times where you have to put your needs first to make the benefit for your child. And sometimes that sounds counterintuitive, but if you can't manage yourself, then the child is going to pick up on that, okay? And that's sometimes a difficult thing. Now, we are, of course, talking about extremes here, but focusing on the positives is no bad thing. And this is one of my favorite quotes. Some of you may be familiar with it or not. As I entered the teaching profession, someone shared this quote with me, and the school I worked in before I moved to Dubai, part of the reason I chose to work there was because this is page 1 of their kind of teacher guide. And I thought this is definitely going to be the right school for me, because they just have this unwavering belief that children are learners, as we all are, and they need support and guidance no matter their background and no matter how easy they find it to transition, whether that's moving countries, moving schools, or coming to school each day. And certainly in that school, there was a great range of needs which created that daily transition and problems around that. And I've highlighted the word teacher here because I think you can change this paragraph and you could put in, parent, aunt, uncle, boss, leader. You can change that and it still applies. Every interaction we have has the capability to leave a lasting impression on the people around us. And I made a mistake this year with a child at pickup time in MPH 1. I overreacted. And it annoys me because I got it wrong. But I've used it every time, particularly with that child, as a memory to check in on them, to make sure they're still okay. And the thing we forget about children is children are fairly naturally resilient anyway. But I overreacted to a situation, and I spoke to the parent, and I apologized to the child because I got frustrated when I didn't need to. And I don't want that child to think that of me. I don't want that child to repeat that behavior to others. And I want people to understand that if we do make mistakes, we have to repair it in some way. And that's the thing we work with on children anyway. Okay, so we've got to reduce that fear of failure. We have to normalize making mistakes. That's a part of the process of learning. And we talk about that in a maths lesson. And it's comfortable. Children can see they've got something wrong, and they can go back again the next day and fix it, or they can go back in 5 minutes and get the help they need. Those things are quite obvious and quite linear, straightforward, but behavior takes time to adapt and to change. So we have to keep making these links for children. We have to come back to this idea of recognizing success repeatedly, okay? So for those of you who have had some perhaps more negative experiences of transition, or maybe perhaps less successful ones in the past, you might recognize some of these thoughts and feelings. But I keep coming back to this idea of, you're not on your own as well. You are surrounded by people who can help you, whether that be, teachers, leaders at school, whether that be your neighbors, family members. But of course, you can also talk to the children. What is it that's making the transition less successful for them? Quite often we dive in and we try and fix it for them. And that maybe isn't as helping them as much as it needs to be, or perhaps not as helping even us manage the situation. And I think often with this focus on the negative, I think back to the spelling mistake here a couple of slides ago, when we overanalyze things and we look at a very short period of time, it can seem particularly bad. And we can get into a negative mindset, and then that's reciprocal in itself. And the transition perhaps takes longer because we can't be calm and balanced. And that's a skill in itself for the adults to model that behavior to the children, no matter how difficult it gets. And then if we take the view of the longer term, and looking at the audience I've got physically here, I know some of your children are 7, 8 years old. I remember some of them when they were 3 years old, and they were joining, and I'm looking at you particularly here. I remember when it came into FS1 in the January, and working with them ever since. And I think if you look at the long term, I think it looks something like that. But I think it's very easy to forget about that. Now, interestingly, these graphs, I think it's interesting, you may not, these graphs are share prices of the same company. Now, this company is very well known, and it's called Tesla. And at the minute, it's experiencing a bit of a dip because Elon Musk changes his mind on things, fine. But the long term is actually 5 years. The medium term is the last year, and the short term is the last month. And I had this idea of creating this analogy of sometimes there are things we can control, and we should try and make that as successful as possible. But there are things that will go against you, and you can't control. And that's where we have honest conversations with children to try and talk about the reality of the situation that we are all in. Honesty is something which is particularly underused sometimes with children. They come to school and we are honest with them as possible. We don't try and shield them from things. We need them to, again, experience failure, experience frustration. And particularly at the age of 7, 8 years old now, children will have gone through school being relatively successful. The concepts that children learn at school before these ages are often able to be taught at home. And I'm thinking for maths, again, things like addition, subtraction, familiarization with numerals. As parents, you are comfortable, mostly, and able to support those concepts. You look at things like storybooks, reading, phonics, alphabet. You are there and able to support them. And you have perhaps the time because it's not such a difficult concept to grasp or to explain. And now as the children get older and the concepts get harder and the duration of tasks gets longer, it is more difficult to sustain that commitment to supporting your child. It can become unfamiliar. The methods for teaching some of these things have changed since I started teaching. So let alone if you're not in education and you have a different experience of those things. And sometimes that can be frustrating for everyone, okay? And quite often, particularly the older children, things like homework become an issue because children aren't completing homework, but they're not getting the support. And the parents will often come in and say, they're not doing the homework. What can we do? Well, of course, there's lots of things we can do, but whatever it is, it has to be consistent, okay? So whatever plan you're creating, whether it's because the children have not got friendship groups or they're not accessing the curriculum, you've got to keep coming back to it and being consistent. The adults have to work together, model that behavior, and identify the success again. Okay, the children need those links made for them. Until the age of about 6, children aren't able to fully understand what a consequence is and why it's happened. But they learn cause and effect at 6 months old. If the ball rolls from here to here, they know that something hit it and it moved. But it takes another 5.5 years, roughly, for them to really be able to fully understand why something has happened. So that is something to be mindful of, being patient because they're actually just not able to comprehend, okay? The last thing on there was asking the right questions. It's when someone comes to me, it's normally because a lot of things have tried and perhaps not managed to solve the issue yet. And quite a common thing that parents will ask is, how do I ask them about the day? They don't talk about the day. If I ask them, they say, it's fine. It was good. And then they move on to the next thing. Or, they go play in their room or with a brother or sister or iPad or just something different. They don't want to talk about school. Now, at school, children are regularly asked this kind of blue column of questions which are gearing them towards some critical thinking. Okay, and critical thinking is particularly useful in transition. If the children can understand what it is that is causing them distress and start to dismiss some of those fears and recognize the success they are having, then again, that cycle becomes reciprocal in a positive way. And the expression of success breeds success. Okay, so if we're saying to children, oh, but you had a fantastic day on Monday and, you came out, you're telling me about the writing you did, your teacher was so proud of you. Children are thinking about that moment. If you ask one of these closed questions, did you have a good day? If you ask that question at 10 o'clock versus 1 o'clock, the answer will be different. If you ask that question when they're tired or hungry versus after they've just eaten or slept, the answer is different. And you know this about children. You know this about yourselves probably at times as well. Okay? So if we can start asking some of these blue questions, and these were just some I thought of last night, so they're probably not even the best questions, but if we're wording things like this, we will get better answers from them and more dialogue. And that's what we need from children. We need to understand them and their needs, and then we can be starting to support them. Okay? And sorry, these next couple are a bit text-heavy. These are where I'm trying to answer some of your more specific questions. But I really like the quote at the top. Batman's the best superhero for me, and an excellent trilogy of films here. But this is, my daughter is learning to kind of stand and walk at the minute, and I find myself keep quoting this. And I want her to be independent and fail, and my wife is there over trying to stop her from falling. But of course, there's the mats on the floor and things like that, and I'm more relaxed about the idea of her falling. And then when she does fall, my reaction is to smile and laugh and be like, yay, and my wife is like, and we're kind of not agreeing at the minute on what our response should be to support her in her stage of learning. And that's a different conversation for us to have, maybe. But for me, I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid to start a task. But my wife's experience is different. And that's where we have many conversations of whether sometimes I spoil our daughter by buying her too many toys, whereas she thinks one toy is enough on a trip. And, in these microcosm, they're insignificant. But if we don't maybe have more conversations about how we're going to raise our daughter, there will be issues in the future. And some parents say, if something goes wrong, don't tell my husband. That's not something we can do. Okay, we are there to report back things that went wrong, but also focus on how to fix them. Okay, equally, we're there to report when things go well. Okay, so one of the biggest things I'd say about the opportunity and expectation is children carrying their own bag. It's such a simple thing. But at the end of the day, when the children get picked up, probably 70% of children pass their bag to their parent. Why? Habit, routine, easier, quicker? I don't know. They carry it around all day. At the end of the day, it's probably the lightest because they've drunk the water, eaten the food. I don't know. It's something which seems really simple, but I wonder about the message that we send to our children when we do simple tasks for them, but then get frustrated that they're not independent. We have to create these times where they have these jobs. Now, coming back to who I am as a person, my bias, I grew up and my parents both worked night shifts. My uncle lived across the road, and my grandfather, and I would often, from the age of 10, 11 years old, be in charge of doing the chores in the house sometimes. My brother did nothing. And I'm not even making this up, did nothing. But my parents recognized this, and they began to incentivize me, particularly for doing these chores, and my brother didn't. Now, I left home at 18. My brother left home at 25. But before I left home, I could cook, I could use the washing machine, I could manage myself. And I got the skills I needed from my upbringing to be independent in life. My brother still can't cook. And he has a son now, and he's turning 4 in a couple of weeks, and he survives, he gets through life, he's fine. But I do wonder whether these opportunities that we create for our children can also start to create some more important life skills. And one of the things that children at Regent, particularly in year 1 and 2, have had the opportunity to do this year is a program called Mini Dukes and Junior Dukes, which we're starting to roll out into next year across the primary. And some of the tasks that the children have to complete are just for other people. Make toast, wash the car. These are things that, especially in Dubai, are often done for children. And we get into that habit of creating some dependency. But again, when it comes into doing something for themselves and making transitions and change, they maybe be lacking confidence because they don't actually feel like they can do something for themselves because they've never had to. They've never been able to. They've never needed to. So I do think, and I'm not going to be looking at the end of the day to see how many of you let your children carry their own bags or things like this, but I wonder, in your own house, at home, making some decisions about, as the children get older, increasing their independence, increasing the opportunities for them to demonstrate some of these skills, what effect that has on, confidence and performance and independence. These are things that we're looking for, okay? And of course, the spelling mistake again. And with the children, certainly of a primary age, I suppose the most common feedback you'll have with children is the weekly spelling test and how they got on. And especially if you're working on it at home, you want to see some success from your efforts and their efforts as well. You want to be proud of them. But particularly with the kind of the question and answer stuff, and engagement in lessons of children offering answers, more often than not, we reward the effort and the attempt rather than how accurate the answer is. So things like trying, I like the idea. We can come back to that in 10 minutes, but it's not what we're looking at the minute. So rather than being dismissive of something being right or wrong, we recognize that their thinking is not quite developed yet. But starting here and sharing an idea, as wild as it may seem, is better than not contributing at all. And we have to, again, recognize the success of them contributing something and build from there. So this idea of, some of the questions we're asking about how do I motivate my child, recognize times when they're successful. We all enjoy that, you know. I never met anyone who likes failure, but I understand that it's part of improvement, okay? So likewise, one of the questions was how to not be a strict parent at home. A strict parent is, how do you even define that to start with? I think boundaries are incredibly important for all people. Humans rely on boundaries, and especially children. So finding this balance between recognizing, again, the behavior you want to see and success with that, and the less desirable behavior. I'm not sure whether that makes you strict or not. I think that makes you a good parent. But again, my dad was in the army, and a strict upbringing was the one we had. So there are some people who were brought up differently and would probably think, actually, I don't want to go that way. Okay? And so this point here is more about you. And some of the faces that I see in front of me here this morning, I recognize from already trying to get involved in the community and attending things like Frizz Coffee Mornings, you guys particularly in the corner here. The transition isn't just for the children. The transition is for you. And a few years ago now, when I was a class teacher, there was a family who had been in Dubai for 3 or 4 years, and it was parents' evening. They were my last appointment at 6:30, something like that. And the appointment lasted over an hour. And the leaders of the school were outside of my classroom saying, like, come on, like, we want to go home as well. And the parents were struggling with their son because he was unable to make friends, particularly. He'd had a couple of friends, but they'd left, and making new friends was difficult. And we spoke about them, what their week was, what they did when they went home, what things they did at the weekend, play dates, nothing. So again, this idea of we want to see behavior, but children don't learn behavior from the expectation, that they learn from the opportunity and support along the way. So we researched things that they could do in the evenings and weekends. We talked about play dates. We built their social life together. And we got to the point in the conversation where they recognized that they would have to go out of their comfort zone to model to their child that it was okay to do that. And that is an extreme situation. And things did improve for that family quite quickly. But once we moved away from the child doing individual activities like karate, and there's nothing wrong with karate, it's great for self-confidence, discipline, and all these desirable traits as well. But how is the child going to develop social interactions from doing an independent activity? So, and that's a consideration as well. You need a good balance of activities for your children to develop a good range of skills. Just a quick point about WhatsApp. Normally, we try and avoid WhatsApp, but I can't. It always haunts me down. Someone comes and shows me this is our WhatsApp group and this is what is being said, and can we talk about this? I think, again, positively, WhatsApp groups can be fantastic for establishing your community as parents and ensuring that children have a good range of opportunities to interact with their peers, particularly for those children who the focus in the short term is language development. So finding out about summer camps, having chances to go on play dates, speak to families from your home country or other countries, all of these things are just more positive interactions. And the more you try, the more chance of success I would assume you would have. Okay. Now, a lot of questions focus on separation anxiety. Now, typically, it's something that children will grow out of before they reach what we would call big school and the age of 4 and above. However, you know, in the past few years, I've seen separation anxiety seemingly come out of nowhere. But it's never come out of nowhere, okay? And that's, you know, the parents will come and say they were fine in FS1 and FS2, and now they're in year 1, they're crying every day. And there's normally something that has happened as something that's kind of escalated the situation, really. So again, some just steps here, which I'm not going to read to you, but remaining calm, and that's probably the most difficult thing as parents, because it's already adding stress to you to see your child upset. You become conscious of the time it's taking, other people, judgment, and all of these things are very obvious and real feelings that you might experience. But particularly us as leaders, we will see this probably less than 1% of children, but it does happen. It happens every year. September, there are normally a handful of children who will struggle to settle. And I think I've put here, so no longer than 2 weeks. Yeah, so 2 weeks is normally the longest it will last for, and it will settle down. Now, the easiest thing to do normally is to leave as quickly as possible. There's a boy in year 1 at the minute who also started in FS1, not in September, a little bit throughout the year. And I'd done the tour and assessment, and I greeted the dad that morning and showed him to the classroom. He settled for a few minutes. His dad went to leave, and he started crying. So his dad stayed, gave him a cuddle, reassured him that was fine. And we set him up with some friends in the classroom to play with. And I said to Dad, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Okay, good. Shall we go? Let's leave him. He looks happy. I'll call you if there's a problem. Yeah, I'll just go say goodbye to him. He went to say goodbye. Child erupted again. And then he looked at me and went, I did that, didn't I? I was like, you did, but it's not from a frustrating point of view. You wanted to say goodbye, and you wanted to make him feel reassured. You wanted to be reassured that it was safe to leave him. It's fine. Like these things will happen. And it took another few minutes, and he came out. And the next couple of days, he was a little bit upset, but it gets better most of the time very quickly. Okay. But if it doesn't, these rare extreme circumstances, use the people around you. It's really important to understand that when you come to a school like this, that you are not on your own. And everybody would want people around them if it happened to them. So there should be people, in friendship groups, in your community, in the class. There'll be people to help. And normally, the person that helps in these situations is a child's friend. It's not you. It's not me. It's finding someone who they've got an attachment with already that can walk up the stairs with them, head to the class. They'll probably make attachments with their friends before their teacher. Okay. The teacher will take a couple of weeks to make a really secure bond with the children and get to understand their needs a little bit more, okay? But again, recognizing the success, listening to the children, and trying to understand what it is that's causing them the anxiety is a really good starting point. And then you can be more specific in your response when you're trying to reassure them. Some children, they will be upset if they don't know which adult is picking them up. And, okay, so I'm not picking you up today, but this person will come and get you. And you're reaffirming what is going to happen, which is being honest with them, so that can be consistent. And when it does happen later that day, they will know that there's some comfort in that. I don't know if I've got bribery on this one. Maybe it's on some bribery and negotiation. It's not a long-term strategy in these situations. There was a family a couple of months ago who came and did an assessment. And the child was a bit reluctant with the assessment, but they promised him they could go on the school's playground because they live in the Greens and they can see it from their apartment. After your assessment, you can go on the school playground. You can't do that. If the children are in, you're not allowed on the site. I don't know why you've told your child that. And they put me in a horrible situation when I had to say, no, you can't. However, if you'd like to come on a tour in August and September before you start school again, I will take you to the playground. But you can't go today. And the parents looked at me like, come on. And I was like, no, this is not the solution. So yeah, separation anxiety, it's extremely rare. But it's never about you, okay? Don't worry, there's no judgment from our side about this. We go in and support where we can, okay? Okay, and I'm definitely not going to read all this out to you. A lot of the questions we got a little bit more specific about the differences between the key stages and transition. So FS and key stage 1, I've just put some some particular activities or events that would happen if you're in school or new to the school. These sorts of things normally help with transition. And a few questions were around the class groupings. Now, as much as possible, we try and keep children together with the group that they come in with. But we have a situation where the number of sections might change each year, which can sometimes force classes to be mixed, particularly if they went from 6 classes to 5 classes. That would be a case. But I think one of the questions was year 1 specifically. So year 1 currently is 7 classes, and next year, year 2 will now be 7 classes. A couple of weeks ago, it was going to be 6. So it's very likely that the year 1 classes will stay together because the groups work well together. In year 2, there are 6 sections at the minute, and it looks like 6 sections in year 3. So it could be that they go through together again, or it's depending on the feedback from the teachers and how well those groups go, there might be some changes. But generally, when we do change groupings, we try and take at least half of the class who are familiar with each other and mix them with some other children. One of the things we never want to do is have a whole class of new children together. That doesn't work for anyone because, again, children copy behavior that they see. If they don't have anyone in that room who understands the behavior that's expected or where the bathroom is, that class is not going to be successful for anyone. The first couple of weeks, generally in any year group, you're going to see lots of transitional activities, getting to know each other, getting to know the teacher, rules, expectations, those sorts of things that are very logistical. And the questions around specialists. So next year, in year 1 and 2, it's almost certain there'll be some French lessons and an increase in the amount of time to music as well. Okay? And no iPads in year 2 next year, which I'm very pleased about. Some key. So you'll see generally it kind of, there's maybe less transition work in Key Stage 2. And then the differences from Key Stage 1 is the addition of computing and normally French lessons, and squads bringing their own devices. The day is only actually 10 minutes longer now. So not too different there. And I'm just going to move on again. The transition into secondary is one of the bigger ones. Okay, probably bigger than into nursery. Children are a lot more aware. And throughout the year, there is a staggered approach to this transition. Children are given a much greater exposure to what it's like to be in secondary, to maintain those independent skills that they've developed at a younger age, and have opportunities to meet some of the different teachers for English, maths and science, go use some of those specialist facilities that they might not use too much in the primary phase, and experience what it's like to be a secondary child. And there's a couple of questions about the common challenges of secondary children. Now, there isn't that much that's common, other than these minor things with timekeeping, pens, pencils, rulers, that sort of thing. Sometimes the pace of learning can be difficult for children. One of the things that secondary do here is have some independent study lessons from year 7 up, which is not something that I ever experienced, but it allows children to go back and look at the OneNotes, recap the learning, supervised by teachers anyway, so they can get a little bit more support, so they don't go from one lesson to the next lesson without having the chance to ask for help, which again should give a good level of personalization for them. One of the things really different is parental communication. Now I'm going to come to this gentleman at the back here. I've known your children, who are also twins, for a very long time, and they're getting to this point now. But they're also very independent. So they're also very independent, and so normally as parents you have less contact with the teachers, and that's fine. You know, you drop them, they come into school on their own, and these things are fine until they go wrong. Okay, so there are regular opportunities for parents' evenings and things like that, but staying in touch wherever you can with the teachers and getting that feedback, even if it's once every few weeks, coming onto site to pick them up, I'm sure as they get older, they'll find it horrendously embarrassing. But just making that dialogue with the teacher happen still is really important, okay? We're nearly there. So this is the last slide.